Hey guys, welcome to Boxing Squared for boxing news and views from around the internet. Just who headbutted who? Dillian Whyte is claiming that Joseph Parker was the one that headbutted him when the pair met in July 2018. And this is not something that has really ever come out before from either side. It's kind of among fans been one of these situations where it's either been called an accidental headclash, or a certain number of fans, Joseph Parker fans, have suggested that it was a deliberate move by Whyte. But I can't recall anyone ever saying that Joseph Parker was the man that delivered the headbutt on purpose, because obviously he was the one that came off second best, dropped to the canvas. So I'll get to Whyte's comments and then a few thoughts, but first what I want to say is we've seen a lot of Dillian Whyte in the media in recent days, the past couple of weeks, and part of that is because he's got a fight coming up on July 20th. Against Oscar Rivas at the O2, one of the tougher fights of his career. He has to win it to really stay in the mix for a title shot anytime soon. He's obviously been hanging out for one. He's turned down some offers, including a shot against Anthony Joshua, but he's looking for big fights. So to continue to get them, to continue to be at the upper end of the division, he has to keep winning. But part of these comments and a number of statements from Whyte in the past, couple of weeks, it really is about he's fighting on July 20th. So he's saying all manner of things to keep his name out there, to keep connected with fans that he does have a fight coming up. So I think we have to view some of the statements with that in mind. And this one here is a new one. So Whyte says to TalkSport, and before anyone screams headbutt, let me tell you this. He did headbutt me after I dropped him with a killer body shot in the second. I went back to my corner rubbing my forehead to check whether he cut me in the process. I considered it to be an accidental headbutt as he fell to the canvas, but who knows, maybe he did it deliberately. He goes in with his head a lot, and he nearly caught me with his head again in the ninth when I dropped him for a second time with a left hook to his chin. Who knows? One thing I do know is that he should stop whining and try convince everybody that a clash of heads was the reason he went down the first time, and that it affected his performance. Look at the scorecards. He won all of the next 3 rounds. So much for being concussed and walking around the ring in a daze for the rest of the fight. Clearly his headbutt affected me more than it did him. He just needs to get in the queue and wait. Wait, man. There are more relevant guys I need to be fighting like Wilder and Fury once I've dealt with the dangerous Oscar Rivas on July 20 in my next fight at London's O2. Parker needs to relax and focus on getting rid of Kevin Barry. He's making him into a negative fighter and is not guiding him in the right way. He's a young guy who, with the right coaching and mindset, can do something in the heavyweight division. It's an obscene amount that he gets from Parker. I've never seen a coach take that much. I can't remember exactly what the split is, but it's something ridiculous. They are just in it for the money, and they know that a rematch will bring them a nice payday, but I'm not interested. I'm one of the top 4 boxers in the world, so I want to fight the others above me. I don't want to waste time rematching people I've already beaten below. Dillian Whyte's statements, and bear in mind he did rematch Derek Chisora, and that was clearly for money. So I think, Dillian Whyte, those statements, some of them you have to take with a grain of salt. But getting back to the comments about the headbutt, I don't think I'd ever considered Joseph Parker as being responsible for delivering it in terms of a deliberate way. The way I thought about it, having watched it live, because I thought it was watching the fight live, I thought it was a punch. It was only on the replay between rounds where it was apparent that it was a head clash. But I don't think I've seen anyone ever suggest that Joseph Parker was the one that delivered it deliberately. So I don't know how many people will actually sort of back Whyte on this one. And some of the statements there about Joseph Parker as a guy that leans in with his head a lot. It's not really that true. He's not really an inside fighter. He generally manages range quite well, and he doesn't lead with the head. He's not a Jeff Horn style of fighter, sort of, he's got his right hand, his left hand, and his headbutt. That's not the sort of fighter that Joseph Parker is. You don't actually see him working on the inside a lot. Part of the actual style clash in that fight with Parker was Parker came in and said he was going to be more aggressive than he was against Anthony Joshua, where he was very timid for big parts of that fight. And ultimately that played into Dillian Whyte's hands. He was trading with Whyte and, really giving up some of his advantages in the boxing and the things that would separate him from Dillian Whyte. We saw it in that first round. Joseph Parker made Dillian Whyte look like he was in slow motion. It was a very slick performance in that first round. But I guess the point there about he won the rounds after the head clash, I also remember Joseph Parker saying, and this was some weeks or months after that fight, that he didn't really remember anything after that round until later in the fight. So he clearly must have been, if he was affected in the way that his team and he says he was affected, he must have been just operating off instinct, and even if he was foggy. But ultimately, it's a fight. And this is the thing that people keep bickering about. Stuff happens. Stuff happens in a fight. You have to regroup, react, and you have to change your, style, or you have to change some of the things that you're doing in there to react to what's happened. And Joseph Parker obviously was trying to do that, but it wasn't enough. Ultimately, he did not win the fight. Part of my thoughts on that fight is Joseph Parker did what he normally does through some of the mid-rounds. He slowed down. He was conserving energy, and ultimately those that sort of soft spot through the mid-rounds where he wasn't doing a lot, where Whyte was starting to rack up the rounds, it did ultimately cost him on the scorecards, and you can sort of put that down to being part of the reason that he lost the fight. I mean, a lot of Joseph Parker fans, and bear in mind, I'm a massive Joseph Parker fan, but just putting it down to the head clash, well, that seems to be one thing that people will rely on. But like I say, it's a fight. Things can and do happen, as happened in that fight. I mean, we also saw that Joseph Parker did put Dillian Whyte down in the 12th round. Whyte was exhausted. He, almost couldn't stand up by the end, but he managed to survive. And I think we have to remember that Joseph Parker, as I was sort of alluding to earlier, fought more in Dillian Whyte's wheelhouse, fought the sort of fight that Dillian Whyte, the only sort of fight that he could win. He obviously played into the whole thing that he needed to be more aggressive, that he had to really try to put it on Whyte where he hadn't against Joshua. So I guess this whole thing about who headbutted who, in some ways it's irrelevant, but yeah, I was surprised to see Dillian Whyte suggesting that Parker had thrown it in his way, but it came off a body shot. And, maybe he's trying to say that it was an involuntary reaction to taking the blow and then sort of, pitching forward. What do you make of this? Do you think it's a case where Dillian Whyte is just deflecting here? Or do you think it's a case, like I sort of alluded to before, Dillian Whyte is making the most of media sort of spotlight and shine that's on him now ahead of his fight, keep his name out there and get some headlines? Because to me, that looks like it is part of it. Drop a comment, loud and often. Hit like, hit subscribe. Follow me on Twitter, boxing_squared. I'm out.